Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, the podcast for human optimization and understanding. My guest today is Dr. Bill Lawrence. Dr. Lawrence has done an incredible study of nearly the last decade on bioregulatory peptides, and we discussed bioregulatory peptides in last week's episode with Phil Mikens. In that episode, if you haven't listened to it, I'd strongly encourage you going back to it because we discuss a lot of the physiology and how the bioregulatory peptides affect their physiological changes on DNA. This week's episode, Dr. Lawrence discusses his research showing the efficacy of these incredible compounds, and he measures that with not only telomere length assessment, but also DNA methylation. I think you'll find this episode incredibly interesting, and that probably will change maybe the way you think about how you want to manage the rest of your life. So please enjoy this episode with Dr. Bill Lawrence.
Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. Ready for some thought-provoking cerebral whipping and the destruction of ridiculous medical dogma? Want to shift those stale, moldy old paradigms? Well then, don that thinking cap of yours, get down in the cave, and join our host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, for this week's episode. Let's start spelunking.
Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, everyone, the podcast for human optimization and understanding. I'm here with Dr. Bill Lawrence, who is going to follow up on our episode last week that I had with Phil Mikens on the bioregulatory peptides. Bill, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right. So tell people how I think you have a very interesting background because you're not only a scientist, but you're also an attorney. And we spoke about 3 years ago when you were starting this study, and we're going to discuss that in a lot of detail. But tell everybody how you got interested in this and the way it kind of evolved for you.
Sure. I'll make it as short as possible. I started my professional career out of UCLA as a tax attorney. And what I know about myself is that once I learn how to do something, Stefan, I get bored with it. And so about every 10 years, I would change careers. So I practiced tax law, estate planning mostly for about 10 years. And then got involved in a lot of entrepreneurial things. I was building shopping centers and medical buildings and radio stations and just a whole cable systems for the city I was living in, a whole bunch of things. And I got burned out and tired of that, and got a couple other degrees along the way, a master's degree and so forth and so forth. And I was aware that in my family, we don't have, unfortunately, very good longevity. All the men going back several generations that I know about died in their 50s and 60s. Grandparents, uncles, all died in their mid-50s, all of them from heart disease. And then my father had his first heart attack at 57, fatal myocardial infarction at 64. And at that point, I was doing all the entrepreneurial thing and building buildings and so forth. And I thought, I need a better strategy. Because I was I think at that point I was probably in my early 40s and so forth. And so I sold everything off, went back to school, got the PhD in nutritional science, and decided that I would combine my law research background with the science. And I would go after longevity, since that was really a sort of a goal of mine, was to live beyond, that 60 years that my father and so forth lived. And so I've been doing that for, about 30 years now. So that's sort of the background as to how I got here. It's interesting. I got bored with the other careers. I don't get bored with trying to stay alive, though.
There's a little impetus for driving it in the continued direction that you're doing. So how did you find and discover what Cavison was doing over in Russia with the bioregulatory peptides that we're going to talk about today?
Yes, it was actually due to Google Translator. I was doing a lot of research on various health issues and was actually contracting out to medical clinics at that point to provide them with the information, typically if we're talking about drugs and things, to provide them with the actual real information with regard to the published clinical studies that came out of the pharmaceutical industry, because they don't always present the full picture of what's going on. There's some manipulation of the data that goes on in some of those and so forth. And so, and I was looking, of course, at anything that had to do with longevity, and I ran across a published clinical study from Cavinson that was in English that fascinated me. He was talking about exceeding the Hayflick limit, which is the idea of how many times a cell can replicate itself and so forth. So I started looking for everything that Cavinson had published, and because of Google Translator, I was able to translate a huge amount of it. And Professor Cavinson has a lot of publications, a lot of articles, a lot of clinical studies, over 700 of those. And so I really sort of threw myself into reading everything that I could. And when I realized that he had developed what we call peptide bioregulators, what he calls peptide bioregulators, while he was a colonel in the Soviet Union military, I thought I need to go meet him. And so I sent an email, not expecting I would get a reply, but I sent an email to the institute in St. Petersburg that he is associated with. And they were very gracious, and they said, sure, come on over. So I went over.
Bill, what year was that?
About 11 years ago at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so I went over and knocked on the door, and they were gracious and opened up the door and said, come on in. I think they were rather surprised and even stunned that an American scientist would have any interest in anything that they were doing, because unfortunately, because of the politics going back decades, there's not much of an exchange of science information between Russia and the United States. So it was a rarity, I think, for them to have an American come knocking on their door. And I was very impressed with what they were doing. They had a medical clinic as well as the research clinic. Cavinson was running the research clinic, but they had a medical clinic that was treating Russians as well as foreigners that were coming in with these peptide bioregulators and getting really very successful results. So back and forth to St. Petersburg, and then about 7 or 8 years ago, Professor Cavinson and I talked about doing a clinical study in terms of longevity. They don't use the word or the terms anti-aging over there. It doesn't translate really very well, and Professor Cavinson wasn't particularly interested in anti-aging. He was much more interested in using the peptide bioregulators to treat various diseases, heart disease, Alzheimer's, etc. So in discussions with him, I indicated to him that if we ran a clinical study in America, then the word would get out about these peptide bioregulators, and it would establish more credibility, because the rest of the world is going to have more respect for an American study, unfortunately, than they would a Russian study, even though they really are on a par. And so he agreed, and so about 7 years ago, we started a telomere study to use the bioregulators to lengthen telomeres, because as we'll talk about a little bit with some of the slides, telomeres are one of the ways of gauging biological reversal or biological age improvement by measuring telomeres, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then about 4 years ago, just before COVID, we decided to add an epigenetic study. And the idea was that if we were successful and the data, was successful, that we would then be able to publish in an American medical journal and just kind of spread the word a bit about the bioregulators.
So let me ask you a question before you get into your presentation, because there's some consternation with telomere analysis, because it seems to be, I guess, more fluctuating than maybe DNA methylation. And I know you've been looking at DNA methylation as well. Can you give the folks a little bit of a background on how the telomeres or telomeres change or don't change quickly, and the DNA methylation, just kind of a backdrop on that?
Yes, in the PowerPoints that I'm going to show, we go into some more detail about that. But the idea behind telomeres is that At birth, we all have a certain amount of telomere length on the end of our chromosomes, and sometimes people will use the metaphor of the tennis shoe or sports shoe lace, the little aglet at the end of the shoelace.
Mm-hmm.
We have that cap on the shoelace so that you can lace up the shoe.
Right.
Over a period of time with usage, sometimes that little aglet plastic cap will start to fray, and it becomes difficult, of course, then to lace up the shoe. Well, the same thing happens with telomeres in that every time you have a cell replication, you lose a little bit of this end cap that's on the end of the chromosome.
Right.
And when we're young, it's been figured that we have about what we call 10 to 12,000 base pair, kilobyte base pair is the measurement that is there with a newborn. But over time, every time we have a cell replication, we lose a little bit of that. And by the time we are, I would say, in our 60s and 70s, our telomere length, which can be measured with what we call PCR technology, the measurement is probably in the area of about 6,000 to 7,000 kilobytes. And so we've lost approximately, let's say, 3,000 or 4,000 kilobytes of that length as cells have replicated. And there is variation because we find that, for instance, you hear people talk frequently about, stress kills. Well, in fact, the reality of it is that stress really does kill, or certainly impairs people's health, because we have found out, based on clinical studies out of UC San Francisco that were run by Elizabeth Blackburn, we found that people who live with greater amounts of stress, they have accelerated telomere loss. Their telomeres will be significantly shorter than someone else that is not involved in a high-stress situation. Her research has also shown that a pregnant mother, for instance, if her pregnancy has gone smoothly and she's happy about being pregnant, happy about having a family, the finances are fine and so forth, her relationship with the father is fine and so forth, that baby will be, or the new infant will be born typically with telomeres between 10 and 12,000 base pairs. On the other hand, in a pregnancy that maybe wasn't wanted, or there was difficulty or financial problems, emotional problems, maybe there wasn't a father around, death of a loved one like a parent and so forth, those newborns will have shorter telomeres by about 1,500 to 1,000 telomeres shorter than the infant that's born without all of that going on as well. That's how powerful stress is, that even for a newborn, you can have shorter telomeres in that kind of a situation. And yes, there is a certain amount of fluctuation, not a great deal. We'll see when I show some of the PowerPoints, because we're going to look at a series of them, particularly minor there, and over the 5 years you can see the decrease, or in this case the increase in the length. There is some fluctuation, and so we test on a regular basis, and the tests are, I would say, accurate within probably 300 to 400 kilobytes. Okay.
Very good. No, I think that lays it out. Well, you want to go ahead and start your presentation? I'm looking forward to this.
Sure, let's do that.
Let me share it for you. I think you should be good.
Basically, this is the original study that I came across, the mechanisms of peptide regulation of aging. This one and a couple others caught my attention. This is what took me over to St. Petersburg. And one thing that we all share together is time, the value of time. We all want more time, but we, of course, want it to be healthy time. And when I was practicing law, Stefan, a number of people, because I was doing estate planning, these would be people who typically had, financial security, and they were in their 70s and 80s, and I would hear oftentimes people talk about, I would give up a lot. One man told me he would give up his entire fortune if he could have 10 more years of healthy life and so forth. So time is of great value to all of us. And the idea is that we all want more time. As an attorney, I require evidence. or in the science world, we call it data, of course. Oftentimes I'll see YouTube presentations, or I'll be at medical conferences and so forth, and the presenter is talking about this benefit, this intervention, et cetera, but they don't have any evidence that supports it. It's just, their opinion or what their experience has been, and sort of anecdotal kinds of things. I'm sure you've been in those meetings as well.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor. I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called STEM Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. STEM Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. STEM Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once unleashed into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating STEM Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that STEM Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first of its kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co/Dr. Steven, that's with a PH, and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of STEM Regen. Hey Spelunkers, we're thrilled to kick off Season 6 with a fresh new look and the most exciting content we've ever delivered. This season, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of human optimization and understanding. But wait, there's more. We're giving back to our loyal listeners with an exclusive giveaway each and every episode of Season 6. That's right, prizes are waiting just for you. So how can you join in on this fun? Well, it's simple. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and here's the magic touch. Comment, "Let's Spelunk" on any of our Season 6 YouTube videos to enter. Of course, please add anything else you'd like to your review. Don't miss your chance to explore, learn, and win with the Pod of Inquiry. Let's spelunk into the wonders of Season 6 together. Right.
That's not the way I work. Everything that I do has to have data or evidence to it. Otherwise, for me, it doesn't exist. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Professor Cavinson and I decided to do initially one study, the Telomere study. And what we knew from Cavinson's work was that these peptide bioregulators, and I'll go into some detail about what they are and how they're created and so forth. But what they do is they are cellular reprogramming interventions. They can actually reprogram at the cellular level, which then has the benefit of rejuvenation at the tissue level, and ultimately it becomes an organ regeneration intervention. And so we had the science that Professor Cavinson had developed over the years. He has many published clinical human studies and so forth. The idea then that we would do an American study that would confirm organ regeneration, would confirm mortality reduction, and finally biological age reversal. And I'll say at the outset, I don't like the term biological age, because it's impossible to determine for a human organism their actual biological age. It's too complicated. There's too many components of it. But that's the term that is sort of a buzzword that people use these days.
Right.
So we ended up doing 2 clinical studies, what we call a telomerase activation or telomere lengthening study, and then a DNA methylation or epigenetic that I'll explain in more detail. Those are the longevity interventions that we use with the clinical studies. And the little picture is supposed to be me on the left, and most of us, that what we're trying to do is hold the clock back, slow that clock down. And so we do that with, interventions, like some pharmaceutical drugs, like supplements, nutraceuticals, exercise, all the stem cells and so forth. All of those are basically to kind of slow down the biological aging process. The clock on the right-hand side is representative of, in addition to doing that, why don't we add additional potential lifespan? Why don't we add an extra 10 to 20 years of healthy living? And I'm going to show you the how we do that and the proof of that in these PowerPoints. Telomeres. As I mentioned, they're the end caps on the chromosomes. And as we see here, Elizabeth Blackburn is talking about that people with longer telomeres have less risk of developing the various illnesses related to aging. At the bottom there, Michael Fossel, extremely well known in the telomere community, has written the only medical textbook that's used in medical school dealing with telomere. His statement is that it's the single most promising approach to reversing the effects of aging. I think he's overstated it a little bit because there are others, including epigenetics, that we're going to talk about. But the idea is that telomerase activation is a real, very effective intervention. And I decided to put this one in right at the beginning. These are my telomere measurements done at SpectraCell in Houston, Texas, over a period of time. And so I became affiliated with the St. Petersburg institution in October, I think, of 2015. But I had some telomere tests prior to that time. In 2014, before I knew anything about peptide bioregulators, I measured my telomeres because I knew at that point that there was a relationship between longer or shorter telomeres and longevity or not having longevity, and also being susceptible to various diseases. So in 2014, I was 68 at that point. My telomere age, or the length equivalency, we call it, was that of a 75-year-old. So I mentioned earlier that stress is a driver of accelerated telomere loss. And indeed, I had been living in a pretty high stress environment, particularly in that entrepreneurial 10 years or so, under a lot of stress. So my telomeres at that point were 7 years, you might say, older or shorter than they would be for someone who was also equivalent to me in age. Then in 2016, and they scribbled a note on top of the SpectraCell test there, Cabenson peptides, October of 2015. That's when I started the peptides. And so I retested in 2016, and my chronological age at that point was 70, but interesting enough, my telomere age had gone down.
So, okay. Bill, let me ask you a question on that. So this 2016 laboratory finding, was actually not representative of 2 years because you had only really been on the bioregs since October of 15. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was about a year, Stefan, as I recall.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. So for at this point, I was able to kind of, I wouldn't call it, it's not the scientific way of putting it, but I regrew some of those telomeres. I lengthened the telomeres using peptide bioregulators at this point. So I continued on, and then in 2018, I retested again. So in 2018 at 72, chronologically, I lengthened my telomeres significantly. I'd been on the peptide bioregulators about 2 to 2.5 years. And then in 2019, I again tested. I was 73 chronologically, but my telomere age was 35. And if you see the measurements in KB across the bottom, you can see the consistency showing each of these tests show a lengthening of the actual telomere measurement.
Right.
And then more recently, 2023, I was 76 at that point. My telomere age was equal to a 23-year-old. And so presently, my telomere age is more than 50 years younger than my chronological age.
Well, Bill, Bill, if you get this tested in another 4 years, it'll show you're back in the womb.
Yeah, I think 23 is probably just fine. I'm concerned if I reduce my telomeres anymore, my wife's going to leave me for an older, more mature man.
Yeah, exactly. You'll start acting like a teenager, right?
Yeah. We got this Benjamin Button thing going on here. So anyway, we're going to go more into the telomeres with other people, but I wanted to kind of show you a preview of what can happen. So
right.
Basically, over a period of, about 8 years, I have lengthened my telomeres significantly. And we're going to talk quickly about what drives aging. People talk about these biological hallmarks of aging. I think there started off being 9, and there's now like 14 different ones and so forth. Cavins and I are convinced that the primary drivers of aging is telomere shortening, DNA damage, and gene expression errors. Those last two basically can be combined into one, in that we refer to that as the DNA repair system inherent in our cells and so forth. It degrades over a period of time, and some other scientists have come to the same conclusion, and we believe that's the primary cause of aging. Jan Hojemaker talks about that the aging hallmarks are secondary consequences, and that's what I agree with as well. They are the consequences of accumulating DNA damage and a breakdown in the DNA repair system. And the DNA repair system is very complex, and I'll talk about it just briefly because we don't have a lot of time to go into it. A number of studies are now coming up showing this one is 2018. Reduced DNA repair accelerates the aging process by approximately 6-fold. And this is one of my favorite. Ramakrishnan, Nobel Prize, brilliant man, has recently written this book, Why We Die. Highly recommend that anyone in the field of science and longevity read it. He talks about it, as we age, the recycling machinery deteriorates. That's the DNA repair system that we talk about, leading to not only various diseases, but also simply an acceleration of biological aging. And what we do with the peptide bioregulators is we can repair that DNA repair system. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail, but we believe that the DNA damage caused by the degradation of the DNA repair system is what really drives pretty much everything: cancer, age-related diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, etc., etc. So Professor Cavinson, extremely well known in Europe. He was the president of the International Association of Gerontology and so forth for the whole entire Europe region for many, many years. Published over 700 scientific publications, including 27 monographs, etc. And he was a young colonel in the Soviet Union military back in the 70s. And where this all started was the Soviet Union military was aware that the U.S. was attempting to develop laser technology at that time that would damage the hearing and the vision of an opposing military force. And so they're being concerned about having that happen. They wanted to figure out what could they do about it to repair if in fact that kind of battlefield laser was going to be used. And so they took a bunch of the Soviet Union doctors and scientists and said, we are going to give you an unlimited budget. You need to figure out if in fact this comes about, what can be done as an intervention. And so under the auspices let me jump ahead a little bit. Over the years, then they started developing these peptides. And then a few years ago, President Putin gave Kabat-Zinn Russia's highest civilian award for all of his 40 years of service in the development of the peptides. And Kabat-Zinn believed that the peptide, what he called pharmaceuticals, would become a critical development in the world. And in fact, we're seeing that. Stefan, are you aware of the synthetic peptides that are being used, like BPC 157 and so forth?
Yeah, very much so. We use a lot of BPC 157 for musculoskeletal tendinous injuries.
So you know how effective they are. And I think Kabat-Zinn was correct that peptide pharmaceuticals really are going to become a significant intervention. The ones that I use in the clinical studies are for longevity, but other scientists and doctors like yourself are using them to treat different medical situations and typically obtain excellent results. So the Soviet Union first started using them, as I say, as a preventive, but what they also were experiencing, Stefan, is that their submarine corps, they would go out on these 3 to 4 month submarine training missions and so forth, and this is in the late 60s, early 70s, and the submariner crew would come back with all sorts of issues, primarily thymus issues, immune system deterioration and so forth, because they were in these, basically kind of crudely built submarines that were built in the 50s and the 60s. They were sitting in next to nuclear reactors. They were crude protection. And so the Soviet Union said to Kabat-Zinn and others, you need to figure out a way of being able to basically use some kind of form of an intervention to repair the medical problems that these people were having. There was also concerns that the cosmonauts, the Russian term for our astronauts, would also have similar kinds of problems coming in from outer space. And so, as I say, a lot of money was thrown at the research. And then they expanded it. The Russian government officials started using these peptides. They used them in the Olympic teams and still do to this day. That's Kabat-Zinn in the middle here. And they use them primarily for regeneration, muscular problems, and things of that nature. And where they come from is they come from animals. They're typically from 12-month-old calves that are raised in Denmark. A company there has been providing that service. They raise the calves. They then harvest the organs. They process those organs in fractionate them into amino acid powders, and then those amino acid powders are and they're sourced from each organ. So, for instance, they create amino acids from the pineal gland, from the the liver, the heart, the brain, and so forth. So they're what we call organ specific.
And now a message from our sponsor. The power of ketones, your body's alternative fuel. The folks at Approved Medical Solutions have done it again. That's right, with their new Clean Ketones supplement. Imagine your body as a hybrid car capable of running on 2 different fuel sources. While glucose is your body's regular gasoline, ketones are like switching to an efficient, clean-burning alternative fuel. I would say rocket fuel. When your body produces ketones, whether through fasting, low-carb dieting, or intense exercise, something remarkable happens. These molecular powerhouses cross the blood-brain barrier, providing crystal clear mental energy that many describe as enhanced focus and clarity. But ketones aren't just brain fuel. They're efficient energy sources for your heart, muscles, and other vital organs. Think of them as premium-grade fuel that produces less metabolic waste than glucose processing. Research suggests ketones may offer additional benefits, reduced inflammation, improved metabolic health, and even potential neuroprotective properties. They're particularly interesting for athletes seeking sustained energy and anyone looking to optimize their cognitive performance. The best part? Your body is naturally designed to produce and use ketones. It's not about completely replacing glucose, it's about metabolic flexibility, giving your body the ability to thrive on both fuel sources. Whether you're interested in mental clarity, athletic performance, or overall health, understanding and harnessing the power of ketones might be your key to unlocking new levels of well-being. Approved Medical Solutions Clean Ketone Formula contains nature-identical ketones. These ketones provide the same fuel as those produced through a keto diet. Approved Medical Solutions Ketone Formula does not contain sugar, caffeine, or 1,3-butane-diol, and they are not ketone salts. I've been using them routinely now and notice a minimum of a 10% increase in exercise performance. By diving deep into cutting-edge research and real-world applications with leading scientists and practitioners, the Pod of Inquiry illuminates the science-backed path to enhancing your mind and body's potential. You can find us on all platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please join us.
Okay. And then they turn them into either injectable forms or they turn them into capsules. And people kind of, today some people will ask, well, you mean this is medicine that's coming from animals? And they're surprised, and they forget that we have thousands of years of history of using plants and animals as a source of medicine. Okay, there's nothing new about it. In this case, it goes back well over 1,000 years. They're talking about 52 different animal extracts and products were documented used by the Muslims, 1,000 years ago. And even today, we still have, for instance, armored thyroid, which comes from a pig. So it's not such a unique idea. And the way that the peptides work is that I call it docking. What they do is a short chain peptide, because these peptides are only a couple of 2 or 3, maybe 4 amino acids, extremely short amino acid complexes. What they do is they dock with the DNA, okay? But what's interesting about it, and what Cavinson discovered, was that if you extract from, let's say, the liver of a young calf, and you process this in the amino acids and so forth, when a human being, when they're injected into a human being or taken orally, they actually then go to the liver. They don't go to the heart, they don't go to the brain. So from the source, they go to the specific organ. And as a result, what they can do is what we call cellular reprogramming or regeneration at that cellular level. So, as I said, 2 to 4 amino acids, very small. They pass through the digestive system absolutely intact because, number one, they're so small. Number two, they're a natural extract. They're not a chemical that's foreign to the body. We use them for the rejuvenation of human organs and systems. Not in the clinical study, but the doctors enrolled, and I'll talk about those in a moment, use them for their patients. And so what they can do, not only can they lengthen telomeres, but we also have found in the epigenetic study, and Cavinson already knew this, that they could regulate gene expression, and we're going to talk about that as well in the DNA methylation. There are 21 of these natural peptides that are in existence at this point, as I've mentioned earlier, from the very, very specific organs. And so we have a brain peptide, we have a heart peptide, we have several different pineal gland peptides, we have adrenals, muscle, kidney, ovaries, retina for the eyes, we have a blood vessel, thyroid, so forth and so forth. So among those 21, we cover all the major organs, and in the clinical study, we use them to basically enhance the what I would call enhance the status of each of those organs. We use them as cellular programmers in those particular organs, and when we then assess a biological age based on epigenetics, which I'll get to in a moment, we can determine that there has been an improvement in, say, the functionality or at least the biological age of each of these organs. And again, I don't like the term biological age reversal, but it's something that people recognize, and so we're going to look at some of this at this point. We talked about telomeres. Every time the cells divide, the telomere length we lose a little bit, and as we get older, we end up in this situation over here with the old and shorter telomeres. And again, I showed this earlier, relationship between longer telomeres and less risk of common diseases and so forth. So telomeres are associated with aging, mortality, and chronic disease. And so if a person has, we'll see in some other studies here, if a person has shorter telomeres, they're more vulnerable to a variety of diseases. And here we kind of show that short telomeres are associated with every major disease, macular degeneration, cancer, so forth and so forth. And so the idea is if you can re-lengthen telomeres, you make yourself less vulnerable to these various diseases. Now, let's say that you've got cancer or you've got heart disease and so forth. Lengthening a person's telomeres is not going to be terribly helpful in correcting that situation. At that point, you need medical intervention. This is more becomes a preventive thing. If you have longer telomeres through life, you're going to have less vulnerability to these major diseases. What was interesting with COVID-19 is that studies were done, including this one. The people with the shortest telomeres had an increased risk of severe COVID-19, and also other studies have shown there was a greater mortality experience with the people with the shortest telomeres. So they are protective even in this case for a viral situation. This is one of the studies that I saw early on that took me over there. I knew enough about telomeres at this point that I knew that they were very important for longevity and so forth. And so when I saw the English translation of this one, this study was published in 2003 from Cavenson, Epidolon, which is in the family of the pineal gland peptides, induces telomerase activity and telomere elongation. That one is what really finally took me to knocking on the door at St. Peter's Institute. Because up to this point in time, one of the holy grails in longevity science was, can you lengthen telomeres? And the answer pretty much at that time was no, they can't be done. But the Russians were doing it already and had been doing it for more than 15 years. But again, because there wasn't much sharing of scientific data, it was unknown here in the West. So these are just some of the major oral capsule bioregulators for the arterial system, central nervous system, cartilage, liver, et cetera, et cetera. And we only use in the clinical study these oral capsules. We don't bring them in as injectables because we don't want to create problems with customs and the FDA and so forth. They're brought in since they are derived, Stefan, from an animal source. They come in as food supplements rather than as drugs.
Right. Yeah, we discussed that last episode with Phil Mikens. But let me ask you a question before you get into the research results. Every subject took every one of those, or did they have different protocols?
Each person had a unique protocol. It's a great question. The way that we set this up for each person is that we do telomere testing at baseline. We added, of course, epigenetic testing, DNA methylation, epigenetic testing. And from that, we got an approximate, again, I don't like the term, but a biological age number, okay?
Okay.
And that basically told us, is this person aging at a cellular level faster than their chronological age or slower? So we had that data. Then, even though I'm not a physician, we don't ignore the medical issues that people have. And so in the protocol construction, I would ask the people if you have medical issues, let me know what they are, because if they're organ specific, we then can use specific peptides for that person. So if a person has heart issues, we can use the arterial peptide, we can use the liver peptide, the heart peptide. And so we would build then a protocol for that person based on their biological age, biomarkers, and medical conditions. The nice thing is that I think we have roughly about 150 people in the clinical study at the moment. Some people are on maintenance, but about 80% of the people are physicians and other health providers. We basically closed the doors to non-physicians a few years ago. And so as a result, we can build into our protocols medical conditions because it's the doctor himself that's reporting on himself or herself.
Right.
So We then create a protocol, and each person's protocol is going to be different. The average person of the 21 peptides, the average person is going to take 4 or 5 different peptides every month, but we're going to rotate through all 21 over the course of 12 months. Then in month 13 or month 14, we retest both for telomeres as well as for epigenetics, and based on the retest, typically it's improvement. We then modify their protocol. And so in the second year and the third year, we'll start reducing the number of peptides that they're using. But the average is probably 5 or 6 different ones each month. The interesting thing is that unlike pharmaceutical drugs, you don't take these peptides on a daily basis forever, because many of the pharmaceuticals, people are on them for life. The protocol for the longevity here is 2 capsules a day for 10 days only each month. In other words, if there's a liver peptide, you're on 2 capsules a day for 10 days, 20 capsules, and then you're done for 20 days. This pulsing or cycling, Professor Cavinson figured out, it was critical because we don't want the peptides, unlike the way that works in so many drug situations, we don't want the peptides to take over the functionality of the organ. We want the peptides to be used as a cellular reprogramming rejuvenation to strengthen or regenerate the organ, but then the organ needs to function on its own thereafter. And later I'm going to show you some slides of mortality reduction slides where they only use the peptides for the first couple of years. Our clinical study is set up for about a 3 to 4 year participation. And then we basically say goodbye to people, come back and see us in 3 or 4 years and we'll retest you. Unfortunately, nobody leaves. And so we ended up creating a small little maintenance program for them. But some examples here, besides the ones I showed of myself. This person, this is Adams. 2021, his telomere age was 50. 2 years later, we reduced his telomeres down or lengthened them equivalent to a 29-year-old. So he went from 50 down to 29 in terms of telomere lengthening.
And this was a 71-year-old male when you started.
Yes, he is. In this case, this is a 70-year-old female. And her baseline at 77, her telomeres were equivalent to a 76-year-old. In other words, her telomeres were approximately the same as her chronological age. 2 years later, her telomere age was 29. So we had lengthened her telomeres significantly over a 2-year period of time. This is Tora Bright. I have her permission to use her name and so forth. She was an Olympic gold and silver winner in Winter Olympics skiing and so forth. Her Olympic doctor, of course, they do extensive testing of these athletes and test everything in the world. And to my surprise, did a telomere test on her. This is several years ago. She was 32 at that point. Her telomere age was 56. Now, I mentioned earlier about stress being the driver.
Yep.
This young lady, Tora, because I've actually met her, as a matter of fact, she had been skiing since she was about 5 years old, and of course had gotten involved in competitive skiing and had been in, I think, 3 prior Olympics at this point. But when he ran the telomere test, he was stunned that her telomeres were equivalent to a much, much older person. So through his contact in Park City, which is a kind of major skiing area in the United States for athletes and so forth, that doctor got a hold of me. He knew about the clinical study that I was running. And so we took Tora and put her on a program. And in about a year and a half, we lengthened her telomeres to such that she had telomeres of a 31-year-old.
So really, that makes an interesting point, Bill, because a lot of these world-class athletes are under tremendous amounts of stress, not only from a mental standpoint, but from a physical standpoint with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis of all their performance, exercises and everything like that. So it doesn't surprise me that she did have such a high initial telomere.
Yes, I suspect, she was the only Olympic athlete that was referred to me, but I suspect you're right that if the others, if they looked at their telomere results, I think they would be somewhat similar due to the stress. But I'll tell you, Stefan, what's really interesting is that Elizabeth Blackburn, who was a co-recipient of various prizes, the Nobel Prize and so forth, her research team at UC San Francisco were the ones that first reported the strong relationship, or sort of evidence-based relationship between stress and telomeres. But what they then further did was they went back and they started ascertaining how people handled the stress, and they had questionnaires and interviews and so forth. What they found out was it isn't the sheer amount of stress, it's how people respond to the stress that makes the difference. Because the people who reported, they had ways of determining if the reporting was accurate in terms of how they handled stress. Those people had no accelerated telomere loss to speak of. On the other hand, the people who found that stress created, depression and inactivity and had a lot of medical issues along the way, those are the ones that experienced the accelerated telomere loss. So a lot of it was, how do people react to it?
Right. As you know, I'm passionate about learning new ways to address health concerns. Moreover, before I recommend any treatment or supplement, I always try it on myself. Today, I want to share my experience with Troche. I have investigated other phytocannabinoid formulas and found that, in general, they were not consistent or reliable in their results. What impressed me about the Troche delivery technology is that each rapid-release tab is engineered to provide fast-acting, long-lasting, reliable delivery of phytocannabinoids to support your health and well-being. Many physicians understand the importance of using phytocannabinoids for physical discomfort, sleep issues, and mood. But if the formula is not reliable, most patients will give up, never experiencing the real benefits. I put this to the test on myself and actually tracked my progress. This graph shows my results for reducing stress. Troche is so serious about how well their product works, they partnered with People Science to provide the Troche Tracker health assessment application that lets you monitor your progress and works with you to accomplish your wellness goals. If you are a patient, click the link below and the patient button to register for Troche Tracker. Assess your baseline health metrics and receive a free Troche sample in addition to getting preferred patient pricing on all products. If you are a clinician interested in adding Troche to your practice, click the link below and then the clinician button to register for a wholesale affiliate account, or go to the link above. I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.